3 mini shows for you today. Tanner Bibee's debut for the Cleveland Guardians, what the sweeper is and how it works from a physics standpoint, and how the Seattle Mariners can dominate the 2023 draft. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby, freelance baseball writer, editor-in-chief of BravesToday.com. Thank you for making this your first listen. Every single day, we're proudly part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and this is your show. All of these show requests and ideas came from listeners of our Locked On MLB Prospects Discord. If you want to join the Discord and have a lot of great baseball conversation, links in the episode description, links in the show notes. We're starting off with the debut of Tanner Bibee for the Cleveland Guardians on Wednesday afternoon. Called up to pitch the day game, and Tanner Bibee looked good in his first start. 5 2/3 innings at home against Colorado. 6 hits, 1 run, no walks to 8 strikeouts. Little frustrated they didn't let him get that quality start, getting that, that last out to be 6 innings, but only gave up 2 hard hit balls in the contest. And what I noticed when I sat there and watched that outing is, one, just like we expected, threw tons of strikes, 66% strikes, right? Got pretty good swings and misses, around 27%, and his CSW rate. We talked about called strikes plus whiffs. The goal is to be right around 30%. He was sitting at a smooth and easy 33%. When you watch specifically what he threw, little bit different from what you sometimes see as far as he featured the slider a little bit more than the fastball. Now, it's a very good slider, so I get it, but I kind of expected to see a little bit more fastball versus the slider. You do what works. He did what works. He threw 40 sliders in the outing, so about 44% of the time he's throwing a slider, sat right around 82 miles an hour or so, got 39% swing and miss on the slider, and his CSW rate for the slider came out to about 50%. Now, his is more of a traditional slider versus the sweeper, which we're going to get to in that second segment, because he's a tall guy. He's about 6'4", 6'5", and he throws from a high 3/4 slot. And so his release point is very, very high, about 6.5 feet up in the air. And so throwing a traditional slider that breaks down and away to a righty absolutely gives you the ability to harness that unique approach angle. Whereas if you're throwing a sweepy slider, you're not necessarily going to get that same movement and benefit. And again, we'll talk more about the sweeper in the second segment. Throws 36 four-seam fastball, so about 40% of his pitches were the four-seam. Didn't have as much success with this. Averages 95 miles an hour. He touched 98.5. I'm going to round that up to 99 for him. But only 13% swing and miss and only 17% CSW rate. This is something where, again, the angle is tough on it, but the movement, it felt like it didn't have as much movement as you typically would see from a Tanner Bibee fastball. So I'm not sure if that's something where he decided to throw it less because it wasn't working, or he threw the slider more because it was working. But either way, he got through the outing pretty well. Threw 8 changeups, so 9% of the time. I really liked the changeups that I saw. It has good depth to it. It has some pretty good sweep. I think it's an above average pitch. Again, only threw 8 of them. 40% swing and miss, 38% CSW rate, sat around 84, 85 miles an hour, and then threw 7 curveballs. It's clearly the fourth pitch. He can't always land it for a strike, but threw 7 curveballs, averaging about 75 miles an hour, so mid-70s there. 14% CSW rate. Nobody swung and missed off of it. The big takeaways here for me, 27% swing and miss, right? The stuff is real. It can play at the major league level. The control looked very, very good. No walks in that 5 2/3 innings. Something where, as he's gotten the strength gains after he came out of Cal State Fullerton, he was a 5th rounder in 2021. we've seen the velocity tick up, but he's not lost the control. This absolutely feels like, one, he is one of the organization's best prospects for a reason. So I agree there. And then two, there's not much that he necessarily needs to work on. The fastball, I mean, again, if he misses the zone with the fastball, or if he leaves something hanging, it can get hit out because the movement profile isn't exceptional, but the velocity's good. You saw today the CSW rate not as great on the fastball, but that slider absolutely plays. It is a fantastic slider. I do think he could use a little more work on the curveball. Again, he threw only about 7 of them today. Just something as a little change of pace, try to steal a strike here and there. If he could consistently land the curveball for a strike, it's kind of a big vertical breaker. I do think that would unlock another element in Tanner Bibee and what he can do. So I'm excited to see kind of how that change works and what they do there. In just a minute, let's break down this Sweepy Slider. Let's talk about how this thing works from a mechanical standpoint, a physics standpoint, and then why it's so effective when it's thrown with certain pitches at certain times. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends with eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every single player is a perfect fit. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Add your ride to My Garage. Look for the green check mark to know that this part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. Okay, you've heard me talk on this show a ton about the sweeper. The new craze taking over baseball. What is this pitch? How does it work? Why has it become such a big deal? Let's break into the physics of this thing and how effective it is, how it works, and all of that. So the layman's explanation of what a sweeper is it's a slider with more horizontal break than usual that resists the drop of gravity. So think of sliders. There's 3 types of sliders. The traditional slider that you see, we're assuming it's a righty facing a righty. The traditional slider you see will dart down and away from a right-hander, right? So it has horizontal movement from the spin as well as vertical drop because of gravity and because of spin. A sweeper sacrifices a lot of that of that vertical drop for more horizontal glove side movement. And we have, because this is the analytics era, we have a lot of advanced statistics and things like that. We can now define what a sweeper is. And actually, MLB, as of this year, has gone and added a sweeper as a new pitch type in StatCast and all of the advanced data, and they've retroactively gone back and tagged pitches from last year as sweepers. It is a pitch that has taken over baseball. This is the hot new craze. This is what everybody is wanting to throw right now. So the definition of a sweeper, and the definition I'm using comes from Driveline. This is what Driveline, obviously one of the preeminent private pitching labs, this is what Driveline has defined a sweeper as being. It's a slider with at least 6.5 inches of horizontal movement at 40 feet to the plate, minus 2 inches in depth at 40 feet, meaning it drops 2 inches less than a conventional slider when it's 2/3 of the way to the plate, and it's thrown at least 77 miles an hour or faster. And for context here, in 2022, the averages on some of these pitches The sweeper was right about 80.2 or so was the average in 2022. Your average slider was thrown about 84, and your average curveball was thrown about 79. So this kind of exists in a midpoint between the curveball and the slider. And you've seen people in the past call these slurves. And calling it a slurve, it was kind of intended to explain they couldn't really differentiate the curveball and the slider, so they mixed the name together. This is more deliberate when it comes to designing this movement and getting a pitch that will move horizontally more than you would have expected. So you've got the traditional slider that darts down and away when thrown by a righty to a righty. You've got the sweeper, which is mostly horizontal break. And then you have the gyro slider, which uses gyroscopic spin. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Our everydayers will remember when we had you picture a ball in your hands. The gyro slider is football-like spin. If you imagine a perfect spiral, it's football-like spin that uses that to stabilize the flight and lets gravity pull the ball down. So part of the reason why the sweeper has taken over baseball and has become such a big thing is because not necessarily the movement profile, but how hard it is for hitters to pick up on it. So a lot of people, myself included at times, are guilty of trying to evaluate a pitch solely on the movement. How many inches does it run? How many inches does it get glove side horizontal movement? How much vertical drop does it have? How fast is it? Things like that. And the sweeper works a little bit, yes, it moves a lot, but the sweeper works a little bit differently because it's relying on the hitter not expecting the movement that they get out of the hand. So the idea here is it pairs well with certain pitches because of a concept called pitch mirroring. And let me try to do my best to explain this here. So a fastball, we talk about fastballs that have ride up in the zone. They have backspin, and so they drop less than expected. Four-seam fastball is a good example of a pitch like that. You pair that with a curveball. The curveball coming out of the hand has the exact same orientation, like the exact same angle, but instead of backspinning, it's spinning forward and it dives into the ground. So out of the hand, the spin looks the same. It's just, is the ball spinning one direction or the other? That's the concept of pitch mirroring, where one pitch's spin is 180 degrees different from the other pitch's spin, and consequently, those pitches pair very well together. I'm thinking of four-seamer and a cutter. The sweeper pairs well with the two-seamer. The idea here is not so much we are looking for the maximum possible movement. The idea is we are looking for the ball to look the same out of the hand, but because, and that's release point, that's the orientation of the seams, that's the spin profile. But what we're hoping to do is, because of pitch mirroring, there will be a point in the flight of the ball where it could go in opposite directions. If it's a sweepy slider, it's going to run to the glove side. If it's a two-seam fastball, it's going to run to the arm side. So not every single pitcher is going to be able to get maximum effectiveness out of the sweepy slider if they don't already throw something that has that same release angle, has that same spin axis that they can play it off of. Whenever you see a guy, and I went to a baseball game over the weekend, a college baseball game with my mother, who enjoys baseball as a casual fan, doesn't dig into this a lot. And she had a lot of moments where she was saying, why would you swing at that? Why did he swing at that? That ball was in the dirt. because the opposing pitcher did a very good job of pitch mirroring. When it came out of the hand and the first 20 feet of flight, it looked exactly the same as the previous pitch, but this one dove into the dirt where the other one stayed up in the zone. Or this one, in the case of the Sweepy Slider, this one ran glove side where the previous pitch, the two-seamer, had run arm side. So that's why the Sweepy Slider works for some guys and not for everybody. And then the big key here with this Sweepy Slider is a concept called seam shifted wake. So let's try to explain this here. When you throw a baseball, you're using the spin of the ball to affect the path of the air around the ball. It's a similar idea as to lift on an airplane. You have different air resistance above and below the wing. That's what makes the plane take off and lift up in the air. The slider and a lot of breaking pitches get their movement because of the spin, the direction the spin is, the ball is moving. If the ball is rotating from right to left, the air resistance is different on the left side of the ball. It's a lot lower than the right side of the ball, and that pulls the ball to the left. That gets your glove side movement. But a baseball, physically, like the physics of this, a baseball is not a perfect sphere because the seams are raised. And so that interferes with the movement of the ball, of the air around the ball. And depending on how you hold it, depending on which seams cross across the front or the top of the ball at which times, the interaction of the seams can mess with the standard aerodynamics of the ball. And the whole goal of this is the ball moves differently from how the hitter expects it to move. And so this is probably the area with which we understand the least from a physics standpoint about how to create this and how it works. But the idea here is ideally, you want the ball to move differently than how the hitter expects it to move. And so the thing with the sweeper, if you think about it, major league hitters have seen tens of thousands of breaking pitches by the time they hit the big leagues, right? And on just about every single breaking pitch, the hitter internally, subconsciously factors in a certain amount of vertical drop on a slider because the standard slider from a righty to a righty darts down and away. The idea behind the Sweepy Slider is because of that seam shifted wake and because of the spin characteristics, it doesn't drop as much as a typical slider would. It'll still have a little bit of drop. But again, the definition, according to Driveline, is 2 inches less vertical drop at 40 feet to the plate. And so the reason the sweeper is effective is because of the orientation of the seams and how that seam shifted wake keeps the ball from dropping like it typically would. There's a bunch of pieces out there that have kind of breaking down the Sweepy Slider, what it is, kind of how it works. The Dodgers are obviously big into it. The Yankees are big into it. We've talked about that before. The Cubs like to be into it a bit. The Rays are into it as well. But it is a fascinating pitch that really does a lot of work as far as making pitchers' arsenals more dangerous and giving them a better opportunity to surprise hitters. In just a minute, I want to talk about the Seattle Mariners and how they could absolutely dominate this year's draft. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. Getting to know yourself can be a lifelong process, especially because we're always growing and we're always changing. On this show, we talk a ton about prospects and how they get better throughout their time in the minors until they're good enough to be professional hitters. But then even in the pros, they're still constantly changing and improving and getting better. Therapy is all about understanding yourself better, doing a better job at knowing about you and about what you think about, what you care about, how your brain works. Because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way we do until we talk to a professional about it. So BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. It's helpful to learn positive coping skills or how to set boundaries. It's helpful to help you. It can empower you to be the best version of yourself. Therapy is not just something for a person who's experienced major trauma. Just about every single person can benefit from better understanding why they react the way they do to certain things and why they act the way they do. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnMLB today to get $10 off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. Okay, so one of my new favorite podcasts that I have discovered, and one of the few that's outside of the Locked On Podcast Network that I'm still advocating here that you need to go listen to, if you're a draft person, is called Overslaught. Joe Doyle, formerly the head of the MLB Draft for Prospects Live, now senior draft analyst for the Future Star series covering MLB Draft prospects, has a fantastic podcast called Overslaught. And he's done a really, really good job of diving into the draft, driving into the decision makers, how they make these decisions. He's gotten a lot of people on. And one of the shows that he did a couple weeks ago was with Jerry Dipoto, general manager of the Seattle Mariners. He's been in place since late 2015, so he's run 7 drafts for the Mariners. And they have a unique opportunity this year because the Mariners have 3 draft picks in the top 30 of the draft. They have their standard draft pick, number 22, which is there because of their finish last year. They made the playoffs. You know, it's sorted in order of playoff finish once you get to all the teams that have actually made the playoffs. They have pick number 29. That is the prospect promotion incentive pick that they received for Julio Rodriguez winning Rookie of the Year. You'll remember the way the prospect promotion incentive works. My everydayers, we've talked about this a few times now. But the prospect promotion incentive, the way that is set up is if you have a prospect that is in the top 100 on 2 of 3 major lists, and I believe they have Baseball America, ESPN, and Fangraphs are the 3 that they use. And he is up and gets a full year of service time in his rookie year and is one of the top finishers for Rookie of the Year or later MVP or Cy Young before he hits arbitration, you can receive draft pick compensation for that finish. It's designed to incentivize, hence the name Prospect Promotion Incentive. It's designed to incentivize you to promote your top prospects to begin the season versus manipulating their service time by holding them down for a while. So they get pick number 29 for Julio Rodriguez. Fun fact, if he gets an MVP finish later, they will not qualify for additional draft picks because since he has signed an extension, he is no longer considered a pre-arbitration player. And then they get pick number 30. Number 30 is the competitive balance A round. And the idea here is the competitive balance picks are designed for teams with small markets or smaller revenue pools. They get additional draft picks at the end of the first round to help level the playing field from a financial perspective. And then what worked out really well here is those 2 picks, one, they're back-to-back, so 29 and 30, but they were supposed to be 31 and 32. The Mets and Dodgers had their first-round picks kicked backwards 10 spots because they went over the luxury tax, the competitive balance tax threshold, by $40 million or more. In the Mets case, a lot more. And so now the Mariners have 3 picks in the top 30. And yes, it's very useful to have 3 picks that high because the talent pool is good. And Jerry Dipoto said, like, they think that area of the draft, that 20s to 40s or so, is a very appealing spot for them because they do a good job at evaluating talent amongst that area. They haven't always picked there. The only 2 guys that they've actually been able to draft in the 20s have been Cole Young, last year's first-round shortstop, and George Kirby, 2019 first-rounder, 2019 first-rounder who made it to the bigs. The year before, they got Logan Gilbert. He was at 14. They didn't want him to fall that far. They've had higher picks: Emerson Hancock, Harry Ford, Kyle Lewis was a 2016 pick for them. But their internal evaluations, according to Jerry Dipoto, have been pretty accurate on guys at that point of the draft. So yes, the 3 picks are nice, but the bigger aspect of that is the bonus pool that comes along with it. So as you remember, the everydayers who listen to our draft coverage will remember this. Every single spot in the MLB draft comes with a suggested slot value. So this is the dollar amount allocated to you based on the picks that you have. And the Mariners are in the top 10 for total draft pools at $13.17 million, despite their first pick not being until 22. Every other team up there has a pick in the top 10. The Pittsburgh Pirates have the largest pool at $16.1 million. Detroit Tigers have number 2. Nationals have number 3. Everybody in the top 10 for total draft pools have a pick in the top 10 except for the Mariners because they have these 3 picks. The total slot value for just these 3 picks is $9 million, just over $9 million. That's actually more than 12 teams have in their entire draft pool. So this is a scenario, and Jerry Dipoto admitted on the podcast that he's never been in a situation just like this, where they had so much draft capital and financial wherewithal high in the draft. And this is something where the last time we saw a team have a bunch of picks like this, or have multiple picks in the first round like this, it was the Padres back in 2016. They had the number 8 pick, and then they had 24 and 25. And what they did with it is they were able to get 2 college pitchers and have the additional money to float a prepster down the board in third baseman Hudson Potts. Hudson Potts ended up not working out, but the first round pick was Cal Quantrill, and the number 8 pick was Cal Quantrill. The number 25 pick was Eric Lauer. Both of them made as major leaguers, although coincidentally, neither one of them with the Padres. Neither one of them is neither one of them is part of the organization anymore, but it worked out. And so there's a couple different options here for what the Mariners can do. And to me, there's 2 ways that you can kind of do this. Is number 1, you can grab a couple collegiate players that you think are going to be fast movers, that college players typically are a little bit cheaper than prepsters are because prepsters have the extra leverage of going to college. So you can grab a couple collegiate players who are fast movers. I expect one of those to be a pitcher because there's a lot of college pitching in this draft that I really like. And then you can use the extra money to grab a prepster that has fallen for some sort of reason. Maybe it's injury, something like that. I've heard some stuff about third baseman Aiden Miller being a guy who he missed part of his high school season with a broken hand. And so somebody who was considered to be second tier of the prepsters, somewhere high to mid in the first round, you can grab them late and then grab some college players that should move fast. The other option is you can broker a deal with a prepster to kind of float him down to 22, one of those top guys. Think about last year how you saw Kumar Rocker go to the Rangers with a top 5 pick, and they saved a bunch of money on Kumar Rocker that they used to float Brock Porter all the way down to the 4th round when their next pick was. Now, some of that helps because they had the same agent, so you can kind of work that out. but similar idea. You can use this extra money because you have you have in essence 3 first-round picks. You can use some of the extra money from the other 2 selections to float a top 10 prepster all the way down to 22, and then one of your 2 picks there probably needs to be an underslot, a college senior, a pitcher, something like that. But 3 picks and a ton of money in the back half of the first round means that for Seattle being at home, because the All-Star Game's in Seattle, so the draft will be in Seattle, they have an opportunity to run this draft. Fantastic week this week. One more show coming up. We're taking the opposite tack of talking about advanced analytics with sweepers, and we're talking to a baseball historian about scouting and how scouting has changed in modern baseball. And in the meantime, if you have questions for the show, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Show's on Twitter at Locked On Farm. You can email us, lockedonmlbprospects@gmail.com, or drop your questions into Locked On MLB Prospects Discord. Links in the episode description, links in the show notes. Till tomorrow's show, remember, it's always a great time to pay a minor leaguer.